Well, in Canada now, Justin Trudeau is suddenly backtracking on his carbon tax. Trudeau just announced a 3-year carbon tax exemption for home heating oil, also higher carbon tax rebates for people in rural areas. So, is this just an admission now that these climate policies are nothing more than a joke? Let's ask David Creighton, journalist from Canada who writes at the Post Millennial. Also, Creighton's right on YouTube. David, it seems like these climate Nazis are really starting to wake up and get a sense that all of these policies are not actually working. We first saw this with Rishi Sunak in the United Kingdom, having to walk back his policies there. Is this just an admission on the part of liberals in Canada that this stuff was a joke to begin with?
Oh, definitely, Clayton. And what's funny about this for me, or tragic, if you will, is that climate change is a existential threat, a looming catastrophe, except if there's some liberal seats involved and you're worried about getting reelected. Then suddenly you can put your carbon tax on hold for 3 years. Now, that would have been anathema to the Trudeau government just 6 months ago because this is a disaster waiting to happen here. And we've got to do everything possible to stop climate change. And the carbon tax is something the Trudeau government touted as its major offense in the war on climate change. And of course, the whole thing is a big joke anyway, because Canada produces less than 5% of the world's global gas emissions. So even if all Canadians stopped driving their cars, stopped heating their homes, lived in caves, and turned off the lights, we would have little impact on the global greenhouse gas emissions factor. So, of course, it's a joke. And I can tell you, Trudeau was extremely concerned about losing a large part of his Liberal caucus in Atlantic Canada because one MP, Ken MacDonald from Newfoundland and Labrador, already voted twice in favor of Conservative Party motions to axe the carbon tax. So he was the beginning of the end in terms of the Liberals on the Atlantic, the east coast of Canada, who were saying, we're not going to win the next election with a carbon tax in place. Do something about it. Ken MacDonald said, why don't you put it on hold for 2 years? Just in time, of course, for the next election. So Trudeau did one better. He's put it on hold for 3 years. Yeah. And hoping he's going to get reelected just in time to put it back in place, of course.
So what does this mean for liberal? I mean, what does this mean for Canadians? Because at the heart of it, our Canadians probably have been filling their ears with complaints about this, saying, what are you going to do to us here in Canada? This is not what we want. Of course, this is all being driven by the World Economic Forum. Justin Trudeau, of course, is a stooge of the World Economic Forum. Make no mistake about it. This is being driven directly by these guys. And climate policies in New Zealand and Australia and the UK and the United States are all coming out of the World Economic Forum. So was he hearing, were Canadians voicing their opposition to this? And is that why they were worried about losing these seats?
Well, that's precisely what happened. The member of parliament from Labrador who decided he couldn't take it anymore said that's all he hears when he goes back to his writing. Now, if he's hearing this, so are about 24, 30 other MPs. Trudeau cannot afford to lose any seats in Atlantic Canada. He is losing in every other region in Canada, from British Columbia through the prairies, through Ontario, and in Quebec, he's neck and neck with the Conservatives and the separatist Bloc Québécois. So he's in a very untenable position. So he's desperate to shore up whatever support he can, and he needs to retain those seats in Atlantic Canada's. But the spin-off of this, of course, is that once you hit that first domino, the rest of the dominoes start to collapse in turn. So suddenly, if it's okay for Atlantic Canada to have a pause on the carbon tax, how come it's not okay for the rest of Canada? So Saskatchewan now is saying they're going to withhold all carbon tax payments to the federal government until Trudeau agrees to take the carbon tax off of natural gas, which is being used by the rest of Canada. The oil that is impacting Atlantic Canada is basically irrelevant in terms of heating oil for the rest of the country. Most of Canadians are using natural gas. That has not been exempted from the carbon tax. That's obviously an intentional measure. It's based on how Trudeau getting political support, political expediency in Atlantic Canada, and it's not based on anything rational, anything that's scientific, anything that makes sense. And so BC now is saying, well, what about us? How come we're not getting a relaxation on this carbon tax? So once you admit that it's got nothing really to do with climate change, it's a political measure, and you can take it off or put it on at a whim, then people begin to wise up and say, hey, maybe this climate change thing isn't some existential threat. Maybe it's not a catastrophe 5 years in the offing, because Justin Trudeau doesn't seem too concerned if Atlantic Canadians have to pay less.
Oh, of course not. I love these carve-outs, the hypocrisy of these carve-outs for different things. Trudeau also announced measures to incentivize Canadians to install these electric heat pumps. And this reminds me, of course, of what the United States is trying to do. Biden rolling out, we're going to talk about this on the show today as well, which is Biden's dream house, where you're going to retrofit all of your appliances. Americans can barely afford to pay their mortgages and rent right now, but he wants everyone to retrofit different appliances to be more ecologically friendly. So your heat pump, of course, the government said switching from oil to heat pumps in Canada would save homeowners up to $2,500 a year on energy bills, Canadian, $2,000. So, but what about, of course, the cost of installing these heat pumps to begin with, and what sort of a boondoggle it creates for the companies that are manufacturing these heat pumps? We always forget, I love hearing Kamala Harris and these other liberals in the United States saying, yeah, you should just all install solar panels on your roof. That will, of course, save you a lot of money. Great. Where do you come up with $50,000 to install solar panels on your roof? And this is what Trudeau wants to do with these heat pumps.
Well, this is another cruel joke, actually, because I looked into this as soon as we heard that you could get a free heat pump if you're making less than $30,000 a year. So if you're making less than $30,000 a year, you're probably not a homeowner. In fact, I'd say there's a 100% chance you're not a homeowner. So why would you want a heat pump if you don't own a home? So this again is a big charade, a big sham. Other people are going to get a $250 rebate on their heat pump. But guess what the heat pump costs? $20,000 US
What?
installed. $20,000 US. Now, Trudeau says you're going to get that all back in cost savings. Well, even if you're making $2,000 your cost saving, that's like 10 years before you get your investment back. But here's the kicker. The heat pump is not only non carbon free, it actually adds to the carbon problem, but it doesn't work efficiently in Canadian style temperatures. Anything below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, the heat pump is inefficient and doesn't work properly. So that means essentially in most of Canada, with the exception of the West Coast, where temperatures range from minus 20 to minus 40 degrees Celsius, the heat pump's not going to be working very well. So, yeah, you might save a bit of money on your oil or your natural gas costs, but you're going to be freezing because the heat pump is not going to be generating any heat. So this is a cruel joke on Canadians. And once again, Trudeau announced this with the typical smirk, the typical insouciant, I don't care attitude of, isn't this nice of me to offer you this gift? And what a nice idea. I'm telling you how to save money in your household. I don't think most Canadians trust Justin Trudeau to tell them how to save money in their household because he knows nothing except how to waste it. And yet the whole thing is turning out to be a cruel joke, as I've said, and it really is a sham. But more than that, it's such a cynical political ploy because Justin Trudeau has built his political career on censorship, but also on fighting climate change. He even brought in a former Greenpeace activist into the cabinet as his environment minister to show the world how much He was dedicated to stopping climate change. And the whole thing is unraveling before his eyes right now because he's so politically desperate just to keep those 35 seats in Atlantic Canada. And the rest of Canada is saying, hey, what about us?
Right.
And justifiably so, because it's really an outrage. And people can see this as political cynicism at its worst.
Well, I know the conservatives there have looked to scrap this carbon tax altogether. So we'll see if that takes place in the next election in 2025. If what happens to Canada if Canada comes to its senses up there. I mean, this sort of retrofitting appliances reminds me of Boris Johnson telling Britons to buy a new tea kettle because it would save them money. He even said it. He laughed about it when he said it, but he really meant it. Like, go out and buy a new tea kettle. This is going to save you a lot of money. This is how you will get out of a recession. This is how you will be able to put more food on the table, is to buy a new tea kettle, a new environmentally friendly tea kettle, and save money on all of your tea every day. It's absurd. And maybe, the cynical part of me in Canada, they want to, if these heat pumps don't work when it gets below zero, maybe that's part of his approach as well, since he's expanded the MAID program. Now 4% of all deaths in Canada are as a result of assisted suicide. So maybe this is another approach to his MAID program. We'll just turn off the heat and we'll just add to our MAID program up there.
Well, we just learned today that Trudeau is also cutting fertilizer for farmers by 30%. He said this was misinformation just 4 months ago, even though a lot of people were saying it's in the ag ministry's books. Just revealed this week that it is, in fact. So what is Trudeau's legacy here? He wants Canadians to freeze. He wants Canadians to die. He wants Canadians to be impoverished, and he wants Canadians to starve. And this is a horrible legacy for a man who is so self-centered, so narcissistic, and such an actor. We never really know who this man is except the performer on stage who has a script in front of him. And sometimes he clearly doesn't even seem to realize that the script is out of sync with reality. Just so out of sync with reality that even people who have very little in terms of intellect can ascertain that there's a huge problem here with this man. And the Trudeau legacy is completely collapsing through the floor right now.
Well, maybe his misinformation police will go after his own government for putting out misinformation on this ag bill. It'd be amazing to see. David Clayton, thank you so much. Hopefully, you won't have to adjust your heat pump there in Ottawa, and you'll be able to remain warm this holiday season. David Clayton, great to see you up there in Canada. Thanks as always.
Thank you so much, Clayton.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.